Howdy, folks. Welcome to the 19th series of Humor from the Logic of Sense. This chapter is all about the relationship of language to the surface. Deleuze doesn't want an idealistic language or a physical language, a language of Plato or a language of the pre-Socratics, a manic language or a schizophrenic language. Deleuze will criticize language grounded in ideas as full of hypostasized significations. Hypostasized means to treat or represent something abstract as if it were concrete. The pre-Socratic philosophers will respond to these significations with denotations. So, for instance, Plato will ask, what is justice or what is beauty? The pre-Socratic will respond, there is a man over there. He is a just man. He is an example of justice. Or there is a flower. There is an example of beauty. That is beauty for you. But for Plato, this isn't good enough. He's looking for the essence of justice, the essence of beauty, and he derides them when they give examples. And Deleuze, of course, is hoping to replace Platonic essences with events. And so Diogenes the Cynic, responding to the idea of man as a featherless biped, will show up with a plucked chicken. There's your featherless biped for you. Or when asked what is philosophy, he'll turn up with a cod at the end of a string. It sounds like something Salvador Dali might do. So what they're doing is they're taking these significations and using denotations to make them be absurd. Still, this isn't good enough for Deleuze. He wants them to come back out of these bodies and bring it back up to the surface, where sense gets produced in conjunction with a third element, which is nonsense, the nonsense of the surface. And the way to do this, or a way to do this, is through humor. Humor can bring us down out of the heights and bring us up from the depths to the surface. Humor, he says, is the coextensiveness of nonsense with sense. It is the art of the surface, the art of doubling. It is the art of the static genesis, humor is. So the static genesis being constructing a structure which can produce sense. So now we find humor is extremely important in the production of sense. Basically, what Deleuze is trying to do is get us beyond language, to break through language, so that we can experience sense directly, because he said in an earlier chapter that we can only experience sense indirectly through language, that we need to break through language to experience sense. So these signified ideas are brought down to the surface, brought up from the depths of the bodies through humor. He's going to contrast humor with irony. Irony is, he says, is connected to ideas. It's the sort of difference between something actual and an idea of something. He calls it the irony of assent. Means it's taking us out of the surface and trying to get us back up into the heights through this idealism. So he abolishes significations by bringing it down from the heights, and denotations by bringing it up from the depths of the bodies. The last thing he needs to abolish is the manifestation. If we look in the terms of the aspects of the proposition, we have the signifieds representing the heights, and the denotations representing the depths. And now he wants to sort of get beyond or abolish manifestation, the subject, the person or the individual, the ego. To abolish the subject, to abolish the manifestation part of language, Deleuze will criticize three different kinds of irony. The first is Socratic irony, related obviously to Socrates and to Plato. The next one is he calls it classical irony, and he relates that with Immanuel Kant's view of how the identity gets established. And the third kind of irony is romantic irony, and he'll use a quote from Kierkegaard to sort of criticize that aspect of irony. He'll say that all these kinds of irony trap the singularities within an individual or a person. Deleuze will connect the Stoic humor with Zen Buddhism explicitly. He speaks directly of Zen Buddhism in this chapter, and he gives the Stoics the staff, the blow of the staff to bring the person to the surface, and we'll get into that more later. And he brings in the idea of the Stoic concept of the void, which is that it had extra being and an insistence. And he'll say the void is at the surface. It's at the surface where objects and events communicate with each other in the void, and this is their substance. Now, this can sound very confusing. We normally think of the void as absent of everything. But if we think of the void in this sense as just being absence of language, we've gotten past language to the surface. That's what he means by the void in this case. The void is the paradoxical element. It's the aleatory point. So he now has a new way of representing the aleatory point. It's nonsense. It's the nonsense of the surface. I find it helpful to relate his idea of the void as cognate with his transcendental field of singularities. This is why he says the Stoics conceived of it as having extra being. That's the singularities. Deleuze's void is populated with an emission of singularities, and he connects the void with a nonsense of the surface and the aleatory point. And this is also uncertainty, and we can see that uncertainty has an insistent element at the surface. He'll say the event is the identity of form and the void. The event has the value of its own absence or its own abolition. And this has to do, again, if we think in terms of language, it can start to make sense a little bit, to use a pun, because he'll talk about the idea of Zen drawing, where the brush is balanced on an unsupported wrist, balanced between form and emptiness. Or he connects us with non-thought, with speaking by being silent. So he brings up all these paradoxical things, but if we think in terms of the absence of language, the absence of conceptualizing things, it starts to become a little bit clearer. He'll say that this needs to be done quickly. If we substitute a signification with a denotation, or if we bring a denotation, get beyond that up to the surface, that it needs to be done quickly. Why? Because the mind is programmed in language, it's programmed in concepts. When we start thinking about things, we're immediately back into language and into ideas. You know, music producers I work with, and Bob Dylan is an example of this, will want the musicians to play without thinking about it. Bob Dylan would often not give musicians hardly any time to learn the song. Just give them the idea and hit go and then go. And it's well known that the first few takes of a musical recording are always going to be the best ones, because the person isn't thinking about what they're doing. They're just purely there expressing the sense. So this is how he balances sort of form and emptiness, or the presence of something with its absence. Again, he uses examples from Zen, saying, Zen master will say, if you have a cane, I will give you one. If you don't have a cane, I will take it away from you. more examples of this balance between form and emptiness. On the esoteric side, I want to get back to, he mentions this idea of the blow from the philosophical staff, which of course relates to the Zen masters who would give their students a blow to kind of bring them out of their heads and out of their bodies and try to get them to the surface. But Deleuze will give the Stoics staff too to do the same thing. And he says the Stoics, if necessary, will give their students a blow of the staff being the instrument of every possible designation. The staff is the universal instrument, the master of questions. So I believe with this idea of the staff that he's also making a pun with the music staff, which is how music gets notated. He's saying it's the instrument of every possible designation. And so you get, musical instruments, and that's a music staff is the paper, the notation. It's how music gets notated. It's if you've ever seen sheet music, that all the music is written on a staff. It consists of 5 horizontal lines, and the space is in between them. And on the left side, there will be a clef, a treble clef or a bass clef. And then there might be some symbols of sharps and flats, which say what key the music is to be played in. So this is also a staff. And if you consider that music is also something that brings a person to the surface, it brings them down from the heights if they're in their head. If they're thinking of ideas, it'll bring them up out of their bodies. When they're attentively listening to music, they're right on the surface. If they get really into it, they'll also get outside their own identity. So music can play the same role of humor. And there's another book where Deleuze basically says that the only reason he's doing philosophy is because he doesn't know how to play music, that he would rather be doing it through music, but he doesn't have that skill, so he uses philosophy. He regards music very highly. There's also the pun with the blow of the staff, which he mentions in this chapter. Blow in music refers to blowing your horn. And one of the examples, sort of the Zen-like examples of the Stoic philosophers Deleuze gives, is that Chrysippus says, if you've never lost something, then you still have it. You've never lost horns, ergo you have horns. So he connects that, and also to blow is a jazz term to improvise. And so I believe he's sort of using music as well as humor. Now, he doesn't specifically mention humor, but this gets into the idea of its absence, of its form and its absence. He mentions a couple of things that indicate the form of music, i.e. the staff and blowing, but it's completely absent. He never specifically mentions music. And humor is the same way. He only mentions humor a couple of times. He doesn't go into an analysis of it. It's largely absent from this chapter, even though the chapter is about humor. Okay, we'll see you next time.